Namaste everyone. A very warm welcome to all the participants in today's webinar. This is our 31st webinar in our Rtambhara talk series. I observe a lot of new participants today and we just wanted to know Rtambhara is a wellness company which looks at wellness in a holistic way, not just the body but the mind as well. And we do all this through the practice, knowledge and wisdom that comes from our ancient Indian scriptures and heritage. We conduct programs and retreats for wellness that looks at personal transformation, for tapping into oneself and unlock our infinite potential. We are conducting webinars with very knowledgeable speakers, and the topics we speak delve into self-discovery, personal transformation, health, harmony, holistic well-being, as well as the arts that help us connect with our higher self. We are uploading all our virtual programs, offerings on our website, rtambharawellness.com. Please do visit our website. And all our previous webinars are uploaded on YouTube under Rtambhara Wellness. And if you would be like to be a part of a Rtambhara community, the details are posted in the chat function. Alternately, please post your contact details, example cell number, email ID, and we will add you to our groups where you will regularly get information on our upcoming programs. So heading towards today's program, we have for you Mrs. Beena Mirchandani, our Chief of Faculty for Rtambhara, who will be talking on the subject Happiness Decoded. And I feel this is a subject we all want to understand and know a little bit more about. A brief introduction about Beena ji. Driving the relationship between spirituality and happiness at Rtambhara, Beena ji has an experience of over 40 years in brand and retail strategy, combined with 25 years of study in spiritual teachings. She also serves on the board of the School of Ancient Wisdom in Bangalore. She has conducted happiness differential workshops, sessions for well-known corporate institutions and social groups. The beacon of a happy mindset and a spiritual life, we look forward to Beena ji, who will enlighten us about the topic Happiness Decoded. But before that, I would like to mention about the program structure, which is as follows. 40 to 45 minutes of talk, followed by 15 minutes of question and answer, which Beena ji will moderate herself. The participants are going to be muted during the talk, and we request you to please stay muted to avoid background noise or sounds as we are recording this session. Please feel free to post all your questions on the chat box, which you see at the bottom of the screen, and Beena ji will go through them one by one. If you personally want to ask any question face-to-face with Beena ji, then please wait until she covers all the questions under the chat section, and then we will give you an opportunity to unmute yourself and ask the question. So let's begin our program today. And thank you once again, Beena ji, for being here. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Reshmi. And it's a little strange for me because now I'm on the other side. I'm mentoring the program, so now I'm in the hot seat. But anyway, it's lovely to see you all here. Let me first just share my presentation with you. So the topic today is Happiness Decoded, and I'm going to tell you why I've chosen this topic. So let's go on to the next slide. All right. So let's talk a little bit about happiness. And this is really my journey into the understanding of happiness. And, way back in the early 2000s, I was working in a company, and I realized that, when we were a very happy team, there was nothing that could stop us. I mean, we were just going places. The whole team was happy. I was happy. I loved to go to work. And, then I was just thinking to myself that when a team is inspired and it's happy, what all they can achieve. We won accolades just every year. Every year we crossed our targets. We did everything that we needed to do. And I realized that, just keeping people happy was really the source of actually achieving anything that you wanted to do. So really happiness was very, very critical. And also at that time, I was heading a large division of the company. And I had, my team itself was over 100 people. And the whole company itself was several stores and everything, which I was heading for a short while. But during that process, I realized, and I've also, the other thing I must tell you is that I've been in the fashion industry. And in the fashion industry, there are a lot of young people that come into fashion, right? So there's a lot of youngsters in fashion, in the industry. And the thing is that these youngsters come from, they leave their homes and they come to larger towns for the sake of, doing well, making their careers, earning well, and all of that. But there was a certain unhappiness that they had, because the thing was they were suddenly exposed to this new culture. They didn't have their parents or their grandparents helping them out and telling them what they needed to do, or just giving them that advice that they needed to. They were all nuclear families, or they were single people living together with friends. But who was there to advise them and tell them what to do? Because they were earning good money, and some of them were actually getting off balance as well. So there was a lot of unhappiness. And then at that time, I realized that maybe there is something that needs to be done about empowering these people with how they can make themselves happy. And so when I actually finished with my career, which was maybe 3-4 years back, I started seriously getting into happiness. And I read a lot on happiness, a lot of Western psychology, positive psychology. I've been reading the scriptures. I've been reading a lot on happiness. So this is really actually, like I said, it's my journey. And it's an East-West philosophy, because like I told you, I read a lot on Western philosophy. And I've also read a lot now on Eastern philosophy. And, so more on, I would say, a lot on Western psychology and a lot on Eastern philosophy. So really what you're going to see today is everything that I'm going to be telling you about is just my journey. So thank you all for being here, and let's get started. So East versus West. So what is happiness? We're going to be talking about these topics. What is happiness? Why happiness? How happiness? Types of happiness, and the Western psychology and the chakras. So here's where there is some sort of a meeting point, I would say. And finally, let's conclude with what the East says about happiness and what the West says about happiness. So let's start with what is happiness. So the definition, simple definition of happiness, and as you can see, this is the Western one because we have Aristotle there and we have Plato there, and this refers to Western psychology and philosophy. So we have the definition of happiness. The Oxford English Dictionary says, happy is, the definition is feeling or showing pleasure or contentment. Now, pleasure, as you know, is something that's very short-lived. Contentment may be slightly longer. But is that enough? Happiness is then the state of being happy. And finally, bliss is that perfect happiness, that great joy that we get. So these are the definitions of happiness. And now I'm going to go a little further and tell you what Western psychology has to say about happiness. And first we'll start with Aristotle, since he's here already. So Aristotle said that happiness is the meaning and the purpose of life, the whole aim and end of human existence. I think we'd all agree with that statement, because really, what are we looking for? If we do anything, if we are nurturing relationships, we're doing it because we want to be happy. If we are buying something, we're doing it because we want to be happy. If we are changing jobs, we want to do it because we want to be happy. So everything in this earthly existence is all about doing everything that can make us happy. So that's what Aristotle said. Then we have another famous psychologist who talks about, who's Sonia Lobromisky. She's the professor of psychology at the University of California, Berkeley. And she says, the experience of joy, contentment, or positive well-being, combined with a sense that one's life is good, meaningful, and worthwhile. So she talks about, actually covers everything that's there in positive psychology on happiness. And that's what she says is happiness is all about. Let's go to Tal Ben-Shahar, who was a professor at Harvard and taught the most famous course at Harvard, which was based on happiness. He had the most enrollments in that summer of 2006. He talks about happiness as not about making it to the peak of the mountain, nor about climbing aimlessly around the mountain, but happiness is the experience of climbing towards the peak. So what are we talking about here? Are we talking about the end, or are we talking about the journey? It's clearly the journey. So really, if you look at anything in your life, for instance, if you're looking at happiness and success or achieving a goal, you have a goal at one point, and then you have yourself at the other struggling to meet this particular goal. And you always say to yourself, I'll be happy when I reach that goal. But what have you done in effect? Actually, most of your life has been spent in frustration or in getting anxiety and tension trying to reach that goal. And so you've spent more of your life worrying about reaching that goal. And when you actually reach that goal, then you are actually planning for the next goal. So then again, you go through that whole phase of anxiety and everything, trying to reach the next goal. So really, our whole happiness should lie in the journey, and it should not lie at the end point. And this is something that our Indian philosophy will talk about. Happiness has three dimensions that can be cultivated: the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life. And I'm going to talk to you more in detail about all of these three, because Martin Seligman was the one who actually restarted positive psychology in the States in 1998. And the reason was that all the studies prior to that on psychology were only about depression and about people suffering, and nobody actually talked about human well-being and welfare. So really, at that point, Martin Seligman, started this whole thing. And it was a good thing he did, because much has been written in the field of positive psychology after that. But we will talk about the pleasant life, the good life, and the meaningful life a little later. And I'll explain to you in more detail. So let's come to our Eastern philosophy. All right. I must tell you one thing before I start this, because, while I was reading up on all of this and studying the scriptures really are not religion per se. There's a lot of philosophy here, and there is a method of living your life. And really what you can get out of this is how you should be living your life. So that's what I'm going to be taking. Those aspects of what's given in our scriptures is what I'm going to present to you. And a lot of it comes from the Bhagavad Gita, by the way. So what is our definition of happiness? So in Indian philosophy, we talk about happiness being associated with number of external factors. All right. And we'll talk about all of these things later. We often spend all our effort in the gratification of our senses, panch gyanendriyas. So all we are doing is, sensory pleasures through gratifying our senses. So we have our five senses, and everything that comes through from there, whether it's taste, whether it's smell, whether it's sight, whatever you're looking at, what you're hearing, that's all we are doing. It's still external. So we still talk about it as external. However, the happiness that's derived in this manner is only temporary happiness and becomes intertwined with cycles of sorrow. And actually, if you delve into your own lives and you stop and think about it a little bit, you'll realize that every time you go on to a slight high with these things, when you acquire something or, something you achieve, then after that, then there is a period of actually losing it, and you go down into a sorrowful situation. So true happiness can only emanate from a peaceful mind that is not dependent on any external agents and remains unperturbed in every situation. So I'm going to quote a few shlokas, and I'm going to tell you about this further. So let's look at chapter 2, verse 70. of the Bhagavad Gita, where it says, Apuryamanam achala pratishtham samundram apaha pravishanti yadvat tadvat kama yam pravishanti sarve sashantim apnoti nakama kami. And what does this mean exactly? So it means as the waters of different rivers enters the great ocean, which though full on all sides remain completely undisturbed, likewise, a person who's not disturbed by the incessant flow of desires can alone achieve peace, and not the man who runs after these desires and strives to satisfy such desires. So a little bit more on that. So you have to have a spirit of detachment and gain complete control of your mind so that the sense objects of the outer world cannot create in you an infinite number of yearnings of desires. That is a man of peace and joy. So this is the steady knowledge as per the Bhagavad Gita. But this is totally in opposition to the modern belief in the material world, which is to fan desires and satisfy as many as possible. And with consumerism, as you know, they're constantly whipping up desires and they're creating needs where nothing existed. And that's a continuous thing that's going on, happening now. But this is very interesting. And I got this from Swami Chinmayanand's commentary on the Bhagavad Gita, where he says the quotient of happiness, look at the numerator. The numerator is the number of desires fulfilled, and the denominator is the number of desires entertained. That's a beautiful way to actually decide that for yourself, what your quotient of happiness is. So the one thing that the ancient rishis said, that it's important to control the denominator. Otherwise, we will not get any palpable increase in the quotient of happiness. And that's true, you know. If you have a number of desires fulfilled, you know, a few desires fulfilled, and that denominator constantly is expanding, when are you ever going to find yourself in a happy situation? You're always going to be on the border of unhappiness. So that's the important thing to remember about this. And just remember this, I think it's a very important thing. Just contemplate on it. So finally, the Bhagavad Gita says, it says that material sensual pleasure is temporal and cyclical in nature. It's dependent on the results and external agents. And happiness that results in true mental peace is internal and independent of any external agent. And how do we get that true mental peace, internal peace? We'll talk about that too. Need for understanding the nature of your thoughts and emotions. I think the critical thing here is self-awareness. I think you have to be aware of your thoughts, your emotions, your desires. Think about everything before you go headlong into anything. And be open to the descent of that ultimate truth. Let's talk a little bit about Western theology. So the Bible says, he who heeds the word wisely will find good, and whoever trusts in the Lord, happy is he. Proverbs 16:20. All right. So in accordance with their reading of the Bible, Christians believe that human beings were originally created in the image of God, meaning that they were completely good. However, people used their free will to turn away from God, following their own desires rather than God's will. This gave rise to a universal human tendency towards evil that the Christians called original sin. But on happiness, the Christian theology confesses that happiness exists, first, in the happy God, and second, in creatures designed and destined for happiness in communion with the happy God. And in response to the question of how happiness may be achieved, Christian theology confesses that divine happiness communicates itself to us freely and abundantly through the mediator of happiness, Jesus Christ our Lord. For now, we enjoy a taste of this happiness on the pilgrim path of faith and repentance. So what is this path of faith and repentance? Okay, So here it is. The Christian ideals of vocation, justice, and missionary activity. What is vocation? Vocation is that any work that serves the neighbor and the community, the common good, also serves God. What is justice? Justice is that we have to, what they say, the Christians say, it's to imitate Jesus, working to transform the world through love and advocacy for justice as they themselves. And then the third thing is missionary activity, which in the gospel, Jesus commands his followers to spread the good news about God to the whole world and to bring people on the path to Christianity. The other way is through knowing, loving, and enjoying God. Of course, you can do this while you're here, but the Christians have another take on it, and that is that one day we will drink fully and deeply from the infinite ocean of beatitude, where we behold the triune God in the unmediated splendor of his personal presence face to face. So this is in the kingdom of God. But while you're on earth, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. This is by Matthew 6:19-20. So this is a little bit about Western theology. I would add that because, I'm going to be talking a lot about our Eastern philosophy as well. Okay, why do we want happiness and why do we seek happiness? So why happiness? In a Western context, it is to be happy in the pursuit of any normal human being. And compared to sadness, what happens to you when you're happy? There's an atmosphere of joy and strength that sustains and energizes us, right? So to be happy at work, to be happy at play, to be happy in our homes, amidst our family is something that we all desire. And that's true. Okay, let's get an Eastern perspective on the goal of happiness. So we all have different goals, right? Some of us want to become rich. Some of us want to be famous. Some want to be powerful. Some want to be loved and respected. But what are we doing all this for? Just think about it. If you want to buy that next car, or you want to have that next, big TV, or the new cell phone, or these clothes, or whatever we want to do, or travel here, or have a yacht, why are we doing it? To be happy. Why do we want to be famous? Because then, if you're famous and powerful, then people will look at you and society will look at you differently, and that will, that'll fan your ego. And again, you're going to be a happier person. Why do you want to be loved and respected? That's still your ego looking for some kind of respect coming from other people. That again makes you happy. So everything that we do is really comes down to be happy. And we are born with this desire, by the way. It is a desire that comes with us through our several lifetimes. In the Indian philosophy, we talk about several births that we take, but each of them, our goal is happiness, and we search for it continuously. So where do we seek this happiness? And I'm continuing on the Indian thought. We search for happiness in places. So we travel to a different location, we go for a holiday, and we think, oh, that's nice, I'm happy. But after a few days, what happens to you? All right. Then we're looking at time. We're saying, oh, this is not a good time. I'm going to be happier in the future. I used to be happy in the past. We're looking for happiness anywhere but in the present moment. Objects, we're always looking for happiness in objects. We think we'll buy the next thing and that's going to make us happy. And of course, it's very temporary. And then after that, it's gone. Circumstances, you want to change your job, you want to change your status, you want to get married, you think that's going to make me happy, or this is not going to make me happy. And so you're constantly looking at changing that. People, you make relationships with people, you break them. And what is that for? Again, because we think that we'll be happy without this person in our lives, we'll be happy with that person in our lives, and that's the way we go on with ourselves. Including the body. So the body is actually, we've evolved over innumerable lives from the unicellular organism to the human, and that is just to be happy. But here also sometimes we're not happy with the body and we want to give that up. That also happens. So where is this happiness located? So where is this happiness? So now you realize that there is I, the experiencer, and there is the world of objects outside, which is objects, emotions, and thoughts. The thoughts may be with you, they may be other people's thoughts, other people's emotions. So there is this world around you, and there is the experiencer, which is the I. Let's see if happiness is in the nature of objects. Is it in the nature of objects? So for instance, if I take a piece of chocolate and I eat the first chocolate, it make me very, very happy, right? When I eat the second one, I may be happy, but still not as happy as I was when I ate the first piece of chocolate. And if I eat a third, I start to feel guilty. If I eat a fourth and fifth, I may actually start to get disgusted. So is happiness in the nature of the objects? If it was, don't you think that whoever experiences it, when and how frequently and how much, that it should give us the same joy? So that doesn't happen. So really, where is this happiness? If that's not the case, so happiness has to be the nature of the subject. And therefore, I, my higher self, I am the source of happiness. I, my higher self, am infinite bliss. So where does it lie? We are all actually seeking our true nature. What is our true nature? Our true nature, according to our Eastern scriptures, is Sat Chit Ananda. I am infinite bliss. The scriptures describe Brahman as Ananda and Anando Brahma. Ananda is the true eternal bliss. It's beyond the dimension of time and space and has no limitations. So the thing about Brahman is that it's completely unlimited, all right? And so the happiness that comes with Brahman is also unlimited. But in the material world, Ananda is pure joy that's attained through the fulfillment of desires or some material gains. And in the spiritual world, it is the pure and unqualified bliss attained through union with the highest self. How happiness? How do we get happiness? So now we're going to talk a little bit about the Western psychology, which says the pleasant life, you have as many pleasures as possible in life and having the skills to amplify your pleasures. So these are again completely sensorial. They are all relating to your senses. And it is literally the wine, women, and song variety. All right. The good life is recrafting your work, love, friendship, leisure, and parenting to use your strengths and your values. And I'm going to talk to you about strengths and values. It's just come up. And the meaningful life, that is one step beyond, using your strengths in the service of something that's much bigger than you are. So you serve society, or you do something that is where you are not. You know, it's not all about you. It's about the world. It's about other people. And you have that empathy with the world. All right. And it's a much larger thing that you do, maybe for more people. So really, as you can understand from this, the pleasant life is the lowest in terms of the kind of lasting happiness you'll get. It's very short-lived. Then you have the good life, which is a little better. And then you have the meaningful life, which is where you will get a little more lasting happiness. And this was by Martin Seligman. So let's look at these values and strengths. So the 6 values that they did a research on and found that it was common across countries, ages, people, centuries, it just through time, everything, it was just the same for everybody. So there's wisdom, courage, humanity, transcendence, moderation, and justice. These are values that if you actually work with these values, and this is dharmic in a Eastern perspective, it is dharmic. All right. So if you do this, then you're going to be happy. It's a natural process because that is your nature. Goodness is your nature. All right, let's look at the 24 character strengths. And really, this was very interesting because I did this for myself. You can go on and check for character strengths on the net and do a little sort of a quiz where you will find out what your top character strengths are. If you start to use your character strengths, you will actually realize that it makes you very, very happy. So for me personally, love of learning turned out to be one of my higher characteristics and character strengths. And I really, I've only had the time and the patience and everything available to me to do this at this point in my life. And I really can't tell you how happy that makes me when I learn something new. So what I'm doing is everything that I do. If I travel, I'm first researching, reading, learning about the place, learning about the history, and it makes me so happy. It really makes me happy. Let's take another example. Let's say there's a girl who works in let's say she works in a supermarket, and all she does is bag the groceries that people purchase. But she's very high on social intelligence. So what does she do? She's at work, all right? Apart from having a huge friend circle, which she probably has because she is socially very active and she has that social intelligence, what she does is that she talks to every single customer that comes by her. So while she's bagging the groceries, she's making friends, she's talking to these people, and she is getting a lot of pleasure because even these people are getting a lot of pleasure out of the fact that somebody is so human to them, is talking to them, and is actually striking up conversation. And by the way, people who have social, are socially active and have nurture good relationships, they are actually the happiest. And there was a study done to prove that. So look at this, and wherever it is, supposing it's forgiveness, use forgiveness in every aspect of your life, whether it's at home, at work, at anything, just use forgiveness. That means you have that quality of letting go of anything that has not worked out for you. Use that even at work. Use that at home. Use that with all your relationships with your family, with your friends. Use it, and it'll make you extremely happy. So use these character strengths for happiness. But now from an Eastern perspective, how happiness? I'll tell you. So there's thought, word, and action. These three things, when they are all in alignment, and they are in alignment only when they fall in the perspective of purity and unity, which is goodness and the oneness that we have, and it's in the order of the universe, that is the time that you are really, really happy. Okay? It's called Trikarna Shuddhi, and it is the purity and harmony of thought, speech, and action. And Gandhiji said something very nice. He said, there was a saying by him where he said that happiness comes when thought, action, and word are all in harmony. And he also said one more thing, which was very, very important, which is to be congruent and to be true to yourself. Always be true. Don't be like two masks talking to one another in a relationship, but be absolutely true. When you are actually thinking and doing and actually speaking the same thing, and that's coming through goodness, you are actually going to be a very happy person. So be true to yourself. This is called true happiness. And I'm going to go into the Bhagavad Gita and talk to you a little bit about happiness through karma. So in chapter 2, verse 47 of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, Karmane eva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bhuhu ma te sangos tva karmani. What does this translate to is that your right is to work only, but never to its fruits. Let not the fruit of action be thy motive, nor let thy attachment be to inaction. So, what really happens to us is that when we are actually doing some work and we find that we may fail and we may not be able to do it, we are constantly agitated. All right, we're agitated and we don't take on that work because of the fear of failure. So we have to avoid this line of thought because it's just wasteful energy. We have to work with all that's there in us, the fullest, and all dedicated to the noble cause of work undertaken. And this is the secret of work in high inspiration. And this must always end in brilliant success. This is the law of activity in the world. So what are we doing? We're not thinking about the past. We're not thinking that, do I have this? I haven't done this properly, earlier, so maybe I will not succeed in this. Or am I thinking of only the reward and I'm anxious about what I need to achieve out of it? So what am I doing? I'm not in the present moment. I'm either in the past or in the future, and I cannot put my full attention to the task at hand. So take your task in hand and please do it to the best of your ability. So Swami Chinmayanand says very nicely, he says, release yourself from the mental preoccupations and through work, live in joy and ecstasy of a divine self-forgetfulness. The work itself is the reward. He himself gets drunk with the joy and satisfaction of noble work done. And it does happen to us. Sometimes we just completely lose track of time. We don't know ourselves. We don't know whether we've eaten our lunch, we've done this or that. We're just so completely absorbed in the work. And that's when your best output comes through. And that's when you're happy. When you're in the present moment, you are always a happy person because you're not conditioned then. So through karma, through right and good karma, you're going to be a happy person. Through swabhava and swadharma, and this is really, I will share an instance of my own life with you on this. In chapter 18, verse 47 of the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna says, Shreyan swadharmo vigunaha parad dharmat swanushtitha swabhava nityam karma kurvan na apnoti kilbisham. And the translation for this is that you do your own duty, your swadharma, though imperfect, then the duty of another well performed. Performing the duty prescribed by one's own nature, swabhava, one does not incur evil. So, what is swadharma and what is swabhava? Okay, I'm going to give you a very simple example, and that example is my very own. Okay. So I'm basically, my swabhava, my nature is I am creative. I love fashion. I have a passion for fashion. And so when I'm doing fashion, I'm creating something, I'm at my happiest. So I joined this company as head of merchandising, and I was looking after the women's and children's the fashion, the range that we the merchandise in that company. And I was working to my passion. So my work, which is my dharma, swadharma, my work and my swabhava, both of them matched perfectly. And I was doing such great work. Apart from doing great work, I was at my happiest. I was really very, very happy. But then what happened was, seeing how well I was performing, I was actually promoted to another much higher position where I actually had to head the organization. And that brought with it operations. It brought with it all the other mundane stuff that's typical of organizations. And I lost out because I wasn't doing so much of the creative, of my creative, which was part of my nature. And at that point, I was actually very unhappy. I was really very unhappy. And I should have realized that. But you know how typical it is? When somebody promotes you, you think, wow, that's amazing and I should do it, And then you go on to the next thing and you realize that it doesn't match with your swabhava, and then you're unhappy. So stay with your swabhava and stay with your swadharma. So like for instance, Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita, he's a warrior, right? So you can't ask him to suddenly become a Brahmin as well. So, he doesn't have that. That's not his nature. It's not anything. So, you can't do things like that, because what you'll do is, in a situation like that, you will create vasanas, which you then now have to get rid of. So don't bother to do that. Try and stay. And even if it doesn't mean that you climb to the top of the ladder, but it's important to be happy, right? So that was the point that I was trying to make with my own example. I, of course, realized it a bit too late, but anyway, I will share it with you. All right. So now let's go to types of happiness. So Western psychology, you had an Aristippus who was actually a disciple of Socrates. But while Socrates had a lot of wisdom, this gentleman thought about it and realized that is it. I want to have the best time of my life here, whatever it means. He was in the court. He enjoyed himself, food, drink, everything, womanizing. He did everything and had a great time. And he said, this is it. This is the way one should live life. Of course, he met a bitter end, but anyway. So he talks about hedonic well-being, and it refers to the happiness you get from feeling pleasure in the moment. So this is, of course, it relates only to the five senses, and it's very, very short-lived. It needs a constant top-up. So like, for instance, you bought something, and then after that you realize, oh my gosh, now it's not giving me that same pleasure. Let me look at the next thing that I can buy, And that's the thing that we're talking about constantly. You just constantly need a top up on that. By the way, hedonic comes from hedonia, which is a Greek word, means pleasure, joy, and being happy. All right. So hedonic well-being is enjoyment, pleasure, fun, relaxation, taking it easy. That's what it is. But it's very, very short-lived. Then came along Aristotle, who actually overlapped with him for some period. And he said, no, there has to be something more in happiness. And he came up with eudaimonic well-being, which refers to the happiness we gain from having meaning and purpose in our lives, fulfilling our potential, and the feeling of being part of something bigger. This again is when you pursue excellence or a personal ideal, use the best in yourself, you develop a skill or gain insight into something, and you do what you believe in. But again, this is longer lasting as compared to hedonic, but will need top up too. But now let's come to the Eastern philosophy, all right, or the scriptures. Again, we refer back to the Bhagavad Gita. So in chapter 18, verse 36, Shri Krishna says to Arjun, Sukham tvidanim trividham shrinu me bharata risabha abhyasad ramate yatra dukha antam cha nigacchati. And the meaning of that is, now hear from me, O Arjuna, of the three kinds of happiness in which the embodied soul rejoices and can even reach the end of all suffering. So by the way, we are all very, very different people. So the kind of happiness that we get is different. And that is also beautifully explained in the Bhagavad Gita, because they talk about what constitutes an action, and the various things that constitute an action include yourself as well. And you are a different person from the next person. So the happiness that you get from the same activity as another person is going to be different. But there are three types of happiness, and we'll talk about three types of happinesses now. So the first one is chapter 18, verse 37. Yat tat agre visham eva pariname amritopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. And the translation, that which seems like poison at first but tastes like nectar in the end, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. It is generated by the pure intellect that is situated in self-knowledge. So what is this? This is sattvic or pure happiness. It's the happiness that arises from the elevation of the soul. And elevation of the soul can happen through anything, out of doing good action, hearing some music sometimes, seeing a beautiful dance, anything that elevates you. However, attaining this is not easy, because if you want to actually travel on the path, sattvic path, then there is a lot of discipline required. So there's a lot of self-control, and living a life of good is a sattvic person. And so the sattvic happiness comes when you do both of these things. So you need discipline, self-control, and you lead a life of good. And both of these things are difficult to do. So that's why it feels like poison in the beginning, but it's like nectar in the end. The second type of happiness, the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 18, verse 38, Vishendriya Sanyogat Yat Tat Agre Amritopamam Pariname Visham Eva Tat Sukham Rajasam Smritam. And happiness is said to be in the mode of passion when it's derived from the contact of the senses with their objects. Such happiness is like nectar at first, but poison at the end. So this is Rajasic happiness, or result-oriented happiness. And this is very materialistic pleasures. And it is when the senses come in contact with external objects that create a feeling of gratification. Of course, it's temporary, but there's another thing in this kind of happiness. It's not only temporary, but the fact is that the objects that we come into contact with, they themselves change. And we ourselves are changing every single minute. So every time, we can't expect to have that same controlled happiness every time we encounter that particular object. That is never going to happen. So that's one thing that we have to understand, that it's never going to happen, that we are going to have that permanent happiness through that particular object. It's not going to happen. The second thing is that this joy is also tainted by the anxiety of losing that joy, that mars the joy. So it's pursued by men of passion. So it's Rajasic. This is Rajasic happiness. And last but not the least, we come to Tamasic happiness, which is verse 39. Yat agre cha anubandhe cha sukham mohanam atmanaha nidra alasya pramadotham tat tamasam udah ritam. That happiness which covers the nature of the self from beginning to end, and which is derived from sleep, indolence, and negligence, is said to be in the mode of ignorance. So here, actually the fact is that we are talking about sleep here, but this sleep is the non-apprehension of reality and not having any goal. And it's pure sense gratification at the flesh level. The indolence that we're talking about here is the incapacity to think clearly. It's the viveka, or discrimination, that we don't have. We haven't cultivated it correctly, and so we don't have it. So all we're doing is getting tossed asunder by instincts and impulses. And the third and final thing is heedlessness, pramada, which is that we don't heed the voice of the higher. There is something in us that needs to go towards the good, and that's our essential nature, but we sort of put it in the background and we don't bother with it. And then we actually go headlong into activities that actually bring the animal nature out in us, and that's not such a great thing. But here now, so let's round this off. The types of happiness we talked about here: sattvic, or pure happiness, that's one that arises from the spiritual intelligence of the embodied self. Rajasic, or result-oriented happiness, that arises from senses and sense objects. It's like nectar in the beginning, but poison in the end. And tamasic, or slothful happiness, is one that arises from sleep, indolence, and irresponsibility, and dilutes the self from beginning till the end. And we talked about sleep as also, of course, physical sleep, but I talked to you about not understanding the reality, and indolence being that you don't have enough viveka, you don't make the right calls and decisions. And then the other thing is that you don't pay heed to your higher self. So these are the three types of happiness in the Bhagavad Gita. as opposed to what we saw earlier in the Western psychology. But here is one place where I think we sort of met some place together, where the Eastern and the Western comes together, because we have Maslow's need hierarchy, which everybody is familiar with, so I'm not going to go into it, but we have Maslow's need hierarchy. And then what happened to Maslow was, towards the end, he started to think that, I think in the year 1967, he had a heart attack. And between 67 and 70, he started to think that there was something beyond oneself in this life. All right. And so while he talked about self-actualization, which is that, you do whatever you can with your abilities and you do everything to the best of your abilities, he started to think there was something called transcendence. And so he didn't write about it because too much was written already about his earlier thing, and it would have taken some time to add this on, but he didn't do that. And maybe he was unwell, so he didn't do it. But there are some instances and some articles that show that he talked about transcendence. And here, I'm going to show you the connection with this particular model, which includes transcendence, and then the one. And by the way, we talked about hedonic happiness and eudaimonic happiness. So the hedonic happiness comes at the lower rungs of Maslow's need hierarchy, and eudaimonic happiness, the longer lasting one, comes when you're going towards the higher part of it. So let's look at our Sukshma Sharira, our subtle body. So we have the 7 chakras. Everybody's familiar with the 7 chakras. I'm not going to tell you more about that. But look at what Maslow did with this. So Maslow, here is his need hierarchy, and here is our chakras. And he sort of aligned our chakras with his seven levels of what he called 6 levels here. Sorry, it was 5 levels, and then he added self-transcendence, which makes it 6 levels. So the 6 levels were sort of actually compared it to our chakras. And so that's what it looks like. So here is one of the closest things I've seen to the integration of Eastern and Western. So let's look finally at what we've learned about the East. And this is in conclusion, as to the East versus West. Let's look at what we've learned from the West and what we've learned from the East finally. So East says that happiness is internal, and the West, most of the psychology says happiness is external. Happiness is entwined with desires and sorrow, and happiness is entwined with everything that surrounds us, objects, people, and situations. So happiness is short-lived if it panders to our 5 senses, which are always outward. And there are 3 types of happiness: sattvic, rajasic, and tamasic. And the West also says that happiness is short-lived in any case. I mean, you can get longer lasting happiness, but it is not. There are 2 types of happiness, hedonic and eudaimonic. Happiness in this world comes from, the East says, Trikarna Shuddhi, from matching your swabhava and your swadharma, and it also comes through righteous karma and dharma. All right? So in the West, we talked about how happiness comes through the pleasant, the good, and the meaningful life. And it comes through the service of mankind, which we got from Christian theology. So the West says that our longer lasting happiness lies in discovering a purpose that's higher than ourselves, but still it's in the realm of this world. That's our longer lasting happiness in this world. But I'm going to show you what the difference is. So West, in philosophy, the West does not go beyond the mind at all. The mind is very much part of it should read psychology. The West does not go beyond the mind in psychology. And that's a fact, because everything that they talk about is all related to the mind. And true happiness comes in the kingdom of heaven, and we have to imbibe his nature. So this is when we come face to face with God. That's what the West says. Let's look at what the East says. But there is a God, and then there is us in the West. There is a God, then there is us. In the East, our true happiness lies in the discovery of our essential nature, which is Satchit Ananda, that happens only when we drop the mind, intellect, and ego. And that's where the East differs, because we talk about dropping the mind, actually dropping the mind. Bliss is beyond happiness, and it's our true nature. It's omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent, eternal, and unchanging. So bliss is what we are born with. And that's why we constantly look for happiness, because we're always looking for our true nature. It can own, and here's the other interesting thing. Like we said, true happiness, we said you could get from the Western theology, we said that you could get happiness in this world through whatever we told you earlier, and by trying to be the closest image of God. But in the East, we say that that it can actually happen in this world. All we have to do is to realize our true nature. And we have to realize that we are God. We are a spark of that flame. So East versus West, which philosophy makes us happier? This, of course, is a trick question. And let me end with a beautiful mantra which says, Loka samastaha sukhino bhavantu, which means, may all beings everywhere be happy and free, and may the thoughts, words, and actions of my own life contribute in some way to that happiness and to that freedom for all. Thank you so much.